I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, and today I am joined by one of my favorite Instagram dietitians that I follow. I've been following Rachel Goodman for a long time. I think the information that she puts out about intuitive eating and diet culture and how to move towards a healthier relationship with food and your body is just fantastic. So I feel incredibly grateful, Rachel, that you have joined me today. I'm total fangirl over here.
Thank you. That's so sweet. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for thinking of me. And I'm really excited for our conversation today.
So I would love if you could kind of open by sharing a little bit about your journey, about how you got here, because I think when we think about dietetics, when we think about nutrition, we often think about weight loss. And I saw this great post on Instagram this week that basically was like, nutritionists and dietitians' job is to help people eat healthy, not to help them get thin. But when we think about the schooling and the culture of even your profession, I imagine it took some big leaps and even some risks and turning down maybe some of the status quo in order to get where you are in your career. So I would love if you could walk us through how you got to this place of supporting people with binge eating and emotional eating and moving towards a healthier relationship with food.
Absolutely. And I think that this is true for me as a dietitian, but I find it's true for dietitians in general, at least like my colleagues that I've spoken to, and probably just health professionals in general. You can tell me from your experience that I set off to learn to be a dietitian because I had my own food struggles and my own body image struggles. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go learn to be a dietitian so I could figure this out for myself, and then I could help other people. And so my food issues stemmed from body image issues, which I think is true for many, many, many people. And so if you think about it, I learned to be a dietitian to figure out my food in order to figure out my weight. Like if you kind of layer it down like that. And so that's what I did. I went to college, learned about nutrition. I also genuinely love food. And when I would read diet books, I remember I think the first diet, I didn't call it an official diet. First diet I did, I was 11. And it was basically, I would cut out snacks at recess. So I'm calling that a diet because basically a diet in the context that we're talking about is a restrictive, depriving mindset. And for years, I read all different kinds of books on dieting. And the thing is, I struggled a lot with binge eating throughout high school and in my early 20s, even as a nutrition student, by the way, which I'll get into. But I did find all these diet books fascinating in terms of the nutrition information and all the sciencey stuff. And so beyond just figuring out my own food and weight, I really did genuinely love food and health. And so I went to college. It is very much weight focused, a lot of BMI talk, a lot of health equals a certain size. And it's something to look at, which we can talk further about. But yes, you're right. It was very much weight centric. So the whole way that I had studied nutrition was through the lens of weight. Of course, it was more, it was how to manage diabetes with food and all of that, which I love. But what happened was I did figure out the nutrition piece. I figured out what balanced eating looks like. And I did eat in a balanced way, except on top of that were also the binges. So it wasn't just balance, moderation. It was, okay, I know the carb, protein, fat combination. I know the difference between an apple and a donut, which I think most people know. But I was still restricting. I still struggled with my body image. I still would binge eat. And the more, the further I went into my career in learning to be a dietitian, the more shame there was, because the more I felt oh my God, I'm such a fraud. Like here I am learning nutrition and I'm binge eating in secret, and I should get it together because I know now, I have the knowledge now to know what balanced eating is. And so that was kind of my journey. I graduated, went to my internship, kind of yo-yoed with my weight. I would say though, for me, the turning point of like body image, you know how like it just starts with the seed, like it kind of builds up. It wasn't like just a one day, 1 month thing that turned everything around for me. I really started just to heal my body image when I met my husband and got married. For me, at least, everyone has their own journey, but that's when I realized like, okay, I need to stop giving time and attention to this. I don't want it to be a part of like my marriage. I don't want it to be like this thing that takes away from that. And so I just made a decision, whatever it is, like stop giving voice to it. Stop like talking about it all the time. And so it might have been for everyone, it's different. Some people need to talk it out and process it. For me, I was just like so done with spending time talking about it. So that was the first step for me. And like, okay, it's not what matters. I, especially like getting, like when I got married, it was such a like truth to realize like your body is not everything. Like it's really not, because the reason, my husband didn't meet me at my thinnest, and we still had like a great, beautiful relationship. And so it really helped me like see the truth in that, okay, it's not being thin doesn't give you everything, and so that kind of started the body image healing piece of it, but I was still binge eating and all of that. And so, I mean, there's a lot of detail to the story, but long story short, these struggles, like my weight did yo-yo, and these struggles lasted probably until my second daughter was born. I was still very much like into this body image struggles and like binge eating. I did have a period of time where things were peaceful, and I did use some of the intuitive eating principles to help me get that. And it was focused on weight loss, and I did lose the weight. I was actually at the thinnest I had ever been after my first daughter. But the struggles long-term still didn't go away. Like as I got pregnant with my second daughter, as if it like happens gradually, it just happens. Well, not just happens, I want to be sensitive to people who struggle with that, but you know what I mean in terms of like getting pregnant. So, when I got pregnant with my second daughter was kind of when I was starting to go back into binge eating again, but like, you couldn't really see that because then you have the weight gain from the pregnancy. But I knew that these problems were not going away. I did opt out of the extreme thinking. I was like, okay, these diets don't work. I kind of promoted myself as a non-diet dietitian who still helps you lose weight, which is very tricky. And so after my second daughter, I still very much wanted to lose the baby weight. I was finding it more challenging than the first daughter, because like with nursing also like sometimes the body, that's the thing about bodies too, is that they'll also do what they want to do, and we have a lot less control than we think we do. Like with my first daughter, part of why I also lost the weight is because of the nursing and how my body responded to that, which I found has been different I have 3 kids. So it's been different with each of my kids. But with the second one, I still had this focus on like, okay, I'm going to lose the weight, but I'm going to do it balanced. I'm going to do it very like, slowly and all of that. But I was finding it harder to like stay balanced and stay on track, not like overeat all the time or get mindless or things like that. And then my friend, who's also, by the way, colleague dietitian, who also struggled with food, was like, did you hear about this book, Intuitive Eating? I'm like, no. She's like, okay, you have to read it. You have to get it. So I got it and I read it, and things like clicked for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this makes so much sense. I kind of have been practicing a lot of the pieces except for the full permission and body respect. I think those are the 2 biggest ones that people have a challenge with. Like, okay, I'll eat when I'm hungry. Okay, if I respect my fullness and stop when I'm perfectly full, like I can accept this. But the full permission throws people off. I'm like, what do you mean? I could just eat cake whenever I want. I'll eat cake all the time. It like scares them. And then the body respect is scary too, because it's like, well, what if I don't want to accept my body at this size? What if I gain weight? And all these fears. But that's when I really started practicing intuitive eating fully, and let go of dieting. And as I was working on it myself, I was like, okay, I was already a dietitian, I think for like about a year and a half. And I was like, okay, I can't keep seeing clients focused on weight loss, because I also saw how it would, hurt my clients. They'd come in, and if they lost a pound or two, they'd be like celebrating, yay, okay, everything's great. What should we do next? Check, check, check. Bye, bye. Right? Like go. And that was just all it was about. And then if they didn't lose weight that week and I'm looking over their food journal, I'm like, well, you ate well. Like you're doing the quote unquote right things. And they're like, no, it's probably like that cheat meal I had on, Friday or something, or I overate on the pizza or something like that. And they're all upset about themselves. They didn't work hard enough and they didn't stay. It was just literally like helping them pull themselves out of being so disappointed with themselves. And something also just wasn't adding up to me as a dietitian. Like sometimes, if the client lost weight, it was almost like I would take it upon myself, like, okay, yay, I'm going to celebrate myself too, because I helped them do that. And then if they didn't lose weight, I'm like, oh my God, am I like a really bad dietitian? Like, why can't I help them lose weight? Even though I wasn't willing to restrict them further. Like if I saw someone's eating balanced, I wasn't going to then give them like less calories or more rules if everything in terms of nutrition is fine. And that's where body diversity comes in, where some people, we could all eat exactly the same and eat well and move our bodies and still be different body sizes. So when I read intuitive eating and I started to learn about health at every size, it started clicking. And I knew to just feel good about myself and feel aligned with my values, I had to stop running my practice with a weight focus. And it did take me time to transition. It was like about 4 months until I actually took the leap and did that. Because I had my own like worries and stuff where I was like, but who's going to come to, because this is what I was been led to believe, like a dietitian, yes, helps you with weight, but ultimately they come for weight loss. Like that was the first question I got from every client. Does it work? What do you mean? Does it work? Will I lose weight? Like it wasn't like my labs are looking like this. Will it work to lower my blood sugar? I was like, well, am I going to lose weight? And so I did have that fear of, oh my God, how am I going to run a practice if no one's going to come to see me if I'm not offering weight loss? Because we live in this diet culture world. Eventually, though, I realized ultimately, and think about this for anyone who's listening, like what is it that we want when we're dieting or trying to shrink our body? Ultimately, what does everybody want? What do you believe that's going to give you? And I believe we want happiness. We want to feel good about ourselves. And we believe that doing the diet is going to give it to us. Yet we keep doing it over and over with this hope and we keep getting disappointed. Yet diet culture tells you you're the problem. And it just makes you feel worse. And it's not getting you any closer to happiness. So I decided, you know what? I want people to be happy. I want people to realize more than just being happy and healthy, to recognize that all these barriers that you think your weight is keeping you from and you need the diet to overcome and get to the other side does not have to be there. You can get directly to the things that you're looking for. You can get to happiness. You can get to food peace. You can get to healing your body image. If you want stamina, if stamina is what you're looking for, and energy, like so many things that you believe you need to shrink your body and diets for, you could almost imagine it like kind of the wall coming down and recognizing like, oh my gosh, I just had to really just press this button for this wall to come down and it's all there in front of me. Why was I driving myself crazy to climb the wall and keep falling to get over there? Of course, we're simplifying it. It's a journey. It's not like you just press a button and voila, it all happens. There's a lot of healing to do. But ultimately, that's kind of been my journey it started out with my own struggles with binge eating, body image struggles. I think just the biggest shift for me with like body image was meeting my husband. Of course, there was more work to be done. And then after my second daughter, learning about intuitive eating, so many parts of that clicking and deciding to kind of change directions and don't regret it. Thank God. So we're here now.
Amazing. That's such a great, and I think that's such a relatable story, Rachel. Like even take out the dietetics part, right? And all the schooling. And it's such a relatable story that I think so many people can kind of see themselves in, right? Is this like the relentless pursuit of, some sort of ideal body shape that, and we put a lot of eggs in that basket that's where happiness lies. I feel like there's so much to unpack there. I want to talk about binge eating. I want to talk, but it's funny, like, as you were talking, I think when we hear someone else's story, right? Like we can see that they're unhappy pursuing their weight goals. We can see that restriction is not a good choice for them. I think even when I recite research to patients and say, we have this study that this doesn't work, what you're doing, like, I think patients can from a cerebral level be like, yeah, that makes sense why humans are not happy when they diet and, da, da, da. But then they almost have but that doesn't apply to me kind of mentality around it.
I'll
Like,
be the
I'm the
exception.
one. Yeah, I'm the one who can cut donuts out. I should be able to, even though we see in the research that that's not a good thing for people, I should be able to do it. I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
I think it's, first of all, the readiness factor. You have to really be able to see diets and diet culture for what it is in your life. And the thing that's difficult about it is that most people don't succeed on diets. And what we mean here is intentional pursuit of weight loss. But you do have a certain percentage, like minority of people who lost weight in a balanced way, intended to, which, by the way, I have to say, you don't know though if it's balanced or not. You don't know what price they're paying. Like, I've had clients who were health coaches themselves and were coaching other clients. And meanwhile, for the time that what they had to go through to maintain their smaller body, like, was so much work, effort, and mental stress. And after, I'm just thinking of one particular client specifically. I think it took like 3 years. 3 years is a long time to maintain something, but it's not for life. After 3 years, I felt like I just cracked. So when you see someone in a certain body size maintaining their size, we don't want to assume the worst. Like, it could be that one, they did intentionally want to lose weight. They pursue that in a balanced way. They lost the weight. They're happy. They're good. And that, that's fine. That's their journey. Two, you don't know if they are struggling, if they have an eating disorder. Three, you don't know if, let's say, they did go about it eating intuitively. And with intuitive eating, you can lose weight, gain weight, or maintain. There's no wrong outcome. And so specifically for them, it defaulted with weight loss. And they weren't intentionally pursuing that. And so you have that group of, that small group. And so it kind of almost creates this hope of, well, I'll be part of that small group. So I just need to try one more time. And I think in order to let go of that, one, you're not a failure and there's nothing wrong with you if you don't fit into that small percentage. In fact, you're very normal because you fit into the majority of the percentage of people it doesn't work for. The other thing is, take a moment to look at your own history and say, okay, how long have I been on this dieting train? How many diets have I tried? How much longer am I willing? Because you have free choice. You can do another diet, but at what cost? How much longer are you willing to stay this path? And doing an inventory of your life. In what ways has diets taken away from your life? Have you skipped a social event because you already had your dinner and you didn't want to be put in a position where you're tempted, so I'm not going to go to that event? Have you gotten dressed to go out and sat there for an hour in front of your mirror crying and hating yourself because of how the dress fit? Have you gone, are you trying to prepare your meals and instead of just going with ease and making something simple, you're now stressing if it fits into your diet plan or not? And the thing about this is that so often you don't realize what a toll it's taking until you're out of the picture. And that's where it makes it hard because you have to get out of the picture, but you don't see the picture. So you stay in the picture. So kind of just take a moment to see, how often are you feeling guilty? How often are you thinking about food? How often are you thinking negatively about yourself? Is that the life you deserve? Because you really have to see diet culture for what it is to realize how toxic it is, to be ready and willing to try something different. And knowing that something more peace, something better is out there for you. There is another option.
I love that. It's almost like I'd be a good question, be like, what would be available to you if all of those pieces weren't occupying so much of your life, right? Like, I think we all have big ambitions, big goals, maybe things that have had to take a back seat. But what would be available if you freed up 10 hours a week that you are currently spending in this, the relentless pursuit of weight loss? I think, because when we talked about this a little bit before we hit play, and I'm curious what your thoughts about it. around the conversation around health at every size, right? And where the research on obesity is and the impact that, extra adiposity has on health. And in the client world or in the patient world, we're always having to balance the recommendations that we make for patients, right, based on their total health, right? And I think that's something that health at every size conversation would benefit from having more often, is that for some patients, the toll that their pursuit of nutrition takes on their mental health is actually a greater health risk than their body size.
It's interesting because you said the toll of pursuing nutrition is a bigger mental stress than their body size. So is it the toll of pursuing nutrition or is it the toll of pursuing weight loss? Because those are two different things.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me. You're right. Because it's the toll of pursuing weight loss as the primary driving outcome versus good nutrition.
Yeah. And I actually love that you said that, because now we could kind of highlight this point for anyone who's listening. It's kind of like a lot of times you'll say, well, I'm doing this to get healthy. Health is behaviors. So be real with yourself. Is this really about health, or is it about, it has to result in a certain size, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And that can mean very unhealthy things. But in terms of, so like the research, because I do get sometimes, I was telling you this before, like I do get here and there, some people are like, are you in denial of the research? What do you mean? Oh, it's so clear. Obesity is this like killer and all of that. And so it's, first of all, actually like talking about that research. So like, is there in fact a health risk to being in a bigger body size? So I think a great research, like a big review article that was shared where they took about 40,000 participants from the NHANES database, which really kind of keeps track of the nutrition and like BMIs of like a lot of people who are in that database. There's 40,000 participants. They checked their lab values. So like their cardiometabolic health. So blood sugar, blood pressure, and like things like that, and their BMI, right? We can have a whole conversation about also why BMI is so unhelpful and dumb in most cases, and archaic, but that's another conversation that we can maybe talk about later. But the point is that they took the BMI as it relates to overweight, obese, and morbidly obese, and who is cardiometabolically healthy. They found that about 50% of people who were categorized in the overweight BMI were healthy, and 29% of people who were categorized as obese were healthy. 16% of those categorized as morbidly obese were found to be cardiometabolic healthy. In addition, over 30% of people in the normal range of BMI, what we would consider healthy, were cardiometabolic unhealthy. So, of course, there's lots more research article, but I like to bring this one up because I think it's such a good one to kind of pick apart. And it's also 40,000 participants. And you want to look at that with research. You don't want to just quote something with 10 people, because like, how are we going to apply that to the general population? And so two things we can see here. In the study, it shows that as weight increases, the health markers did decline. The other thing you see is that being in a normal BMI does not equal health. What society would consider healthy does not equal health. And there were still people who were healthy in what you would consider obese, like almost 30% of people. And so number one, acknowledge that you don't know where someone lies in that. You don't know if someone is obese and healthy. You don't know if someone is obese and unhealthy. You don't know if someone's normal weight and healthy. Like you can't look at someone and have some laser scan that you could see their blood sugar, right? So that's number one. You can't decide a person's health from their size. At the same time, it would indicate that as weight increases past a certain point, so usually I'd say like BMI of really a real change you could see is like BMI of 35, like really, really much bigger body size. You'd see like, oh, well, you know what? Yeah, they might be healthy, but also there's increased risk for all these other things. And so again, coming back to one, if you don't know them, if they didn't ask for your opinion or their help, like you can't then on the internet, let's say you see this with trolls all the time. They'll see someone who's in a bigger size and decide for them that they're going to die from a heart attack. It's like, you don't know this person. You don't know what their habits are. You don't know what their stress levels are. You don't know what their genetic predisposition is. Like you have no idea. So let's stop assuming things about people. The other thing is, let's just say there is increased risk in being in a bigger body size. It's what do we do with that? Do we then prescribe weight loss? Well, we also don't be selective about research. If you're going to quote research, then really take that all in, because we all have something called confirmation bias. Like you can find research on anything to prove your point. It's really about the quality of the research, how recent it is, and taking it into context. Like we said, the evidence doesn't always translate into real life applications because we have a real human being with different situations. And so we also know that prescribing diets, aka intentional focus on weight loss, is unhelpful. It does not work most of the time. For many people, it results in backfiring, in binge eating, in muscle loss, in risk of eating disorder, disordered eating, body dissatisfaction. So even though the person might lose weight, that does not fix their body image issues. And what was the other one that I had on my mind? Oh, and long-term weight gain, actually. So people who diet are actually more likely to just increase their set weight point for most of them. And so we know that prescribing weight loss is not a solution. It's also very stigmatizing and shaming. So this happens so often. I hear so many stories. It's so sad to me. Someone will say, oh, I have this. I actually had someone, my daughter's teacher a few years ago told me this. She had knee pain. And she said, well, I'm waiting to lose 10 pounds to go check out this knee pain because last time I saw my doctor, he said I have to lose weight and I can't go to him without losing 10 pounds. So here she is needing help for her knee pain, but she's not getting the help she needs because of this stigma and this shaming. I could go on and on with the stories, but the point is this focus on body size and making people feel like their bodies are a problem is not the solution. So let's just say even that we're true and being, at a certain size does then increase risk. The solution is still not lose weight or diet. It's not also possible for everybody. You don't know what their body has been through, how many diets they've been that increase their set weight points. So even if they do the diet, their body might fight them on that weight loss because it no longer feels safe at that lower weight. So there's so many factors to take into consideration, medical conditions, medication, so much into that. We can't just I don't believe that prescribing weight loss is not a prescription. Let's just put it that way. Telling someone that comes to, especially with doctors, I find this just happens a lot. I wish more doctors knew about this. Telling your patient lose weight as a prescription for health is not helpful at all. It's very damaging. And so what is the solution then? The solution is, what I believe that I'm practicing in helping people focus on their behaviors. And part of that is healing from diet culture, and intuitive eating helps you do that. It helps you reconnect to your body's wisdom. It helps you listen to your hunger fullness, because so much of nutrition information we can also learn from our bodies. So yes, of course, it's helpful to have nutrition information, and that can be empowering when you combine it with your preferences, with your body's wisdom. When nutrition becomes this sort of meter for morality and how good you are, it becomes toxic and unhelpful because you're disconnecting from your body. So to give you an example of what I mean by that and why learning to connect with your body is helpful and actually goes hand in hand with learning about nutrition is when you start to listen to your body's response, your body's going to tell you, and this can take time, especially for someone who's been disconnected. So some of the things I might be saying might not feel relatable to people who've struggled for a while because they don't hear anything when it comes to their bodies. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but just to understand the concept here, like when you're hungry, that's a sign that your blood sugar is low and you need energy, aka food, to eat. And then when you learn to listen to your body and you feel full, that's because your blood sugar has now gone up in response to the food. And it's saying, hey, we're safe now. We have energy. You can stop. You don't need to micromanage that with like calorie counting. Or for example, sometimes you'll have just something like a carb, just plain carb, and you'll find you get hungry really quickly after. But when you combine it with the protein, it satisfies you for longer. And so your body is telling you that combination is beneficial. Before I even tell you the science of that, your body has so much information already that is pro-nutrition when you learn to listen to it. So that's kind of the conversation I think that we should be having more of. It's not saying like, nope, we're not going to look at any of that research. I'm going to look at this one. Rather, yeah, okay, fine. Bring that research. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about weird errors and what you actually do with it. Because, for example, I didn't see in this research study that they took behaviors into consideration. They were just looking at the metrics like blood values and things like that and BMI. But then where's the conversation of lifestyle factors? Who was at a larger body size and also engaging in unhealthy eating behaviors and binge eating, and who was in a larger body size and engaging in health promoting behaviors? I'm willing to bet that the 29% who were cardio-metabolically unhealthy and were categorized as obese were also probably engaging in health promoting behaviors. So that's something also to look at. I think bottom line, focusing on behaviors and body intuition and wisdom takes us much further in living a sustainably healthy life than harping on weight loss.
It's interesting. I ask my patients after they've, I've given them some things to focus on nutritionally. When I meet with them that second time, I often say to them, like, well, we talked about nutrition when I saw you last, like, what did you notice? And so often they're like, what do you mean? I didn't notice anything. And it took me a while to realize, like, that's not the wrong question to ask. It's that they're so far removed from being able to notice what happens when they increase. So let's just say the recommendation was, let's shoot for some protein at breakfast, right? Let's try and swap out what you were doing with something that's a little bit more high protein. Here's 3 examples, right? And I say, well, what did you notice? And they're like, I didn't notice anything, Jordan. I don't know what you mean. Because that idea of like satiety, fullness, that your meals actually translate into how you feel is not that's not accessible for people when they start this journey, right? They're like, to them, it's like they're trying to check boxes like, oh, I'm trying to follow the rules, right? Like she said, eat protein, I eat protein, without actually checking in. Because I think that's where those behaviors get reinforced, right? Like if every time you ate protein at breakfast, a $10 bill magically showed up on your plate, you'd be like, I'm going to do this tomorrow, right? But instead, it requires this like, reflection and thinking about how they feel.
Yeah.
They're getting $10 worth of energy from that better meal. Yeah. But then when they wake up the next morning, because it's not something that is well practiced, right? They didn't see the $10, right? Like they didn't see the benefit that they got from their nutrition.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I love that you're sharing this. And the thing is, right when you said like protein for breakfast, see, the dietitian me, like, I love talking about nutrition. I love talking about like research on that, like automatically came up for me. Like, yeah, also when you eat protein for breakfast, it does help manage and balance your hormones throughout the day. So you feel more balanced and there's less cravings and all of that. But I'm not going to lead with that when I'm talking to a client, exactly to your point, in that all this talk, and there's a place for education and information, but it distracts from exactly that question that you asked. Well, what did you notice? And that's the intuition piece that really puts it together and makes you the expert of your body. There's the recommendations, but then saying, hey, okay, what is my body's response to this? If you're not noticing your body's response, then that, rather than continuing to focus on nutrition, you're going to feel stuck if you're not actually coming back to how can I reconnect to my fullness cues, to my satisfaction cues, to my hunger cues. Your body is communicating with you. It's trying to tell you something. And if you've shut it down for so many years, you've lost the language. Think about it this way. Like a child will learn a language, let's say at a young age, and it comes naturally to them. They get it quickly, and they speak this language fluently at 5 years old, and they know it. There's no issues. But then at 5 years old, they then switch to a different country. That language is no longer spoken. And suddenly if they go back to that country, it's like, this is a foreign language. Now I have to work really like extra hard to learn it. They're capable of learning it. It's just not going to look the same anymore, but they are capable of learning it and navigating their way in a new country. And so new country, meaning their original country, let's just say. And so I think that would be, you could tell me if that was a helpful analogy. In you naturally know the language of your body when you're born, but then you kind of almost go to a different continent, a different country with Dietland, and follow their rules and their language and completely are disconnected from your own. And now you have to, what we're talking about can sound so foreign because now it is. It doesn't mean that it's not possible. It might feel like a struggle, but it's starting to, with asking those questions, like, what can I stop to ask? What did I notice, instead of checking off lists and like reading more nutrition articles?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about binging, because I think that this is some practical insight for listeners to think about, like how do you even define binging? Because I do think that this probably captures more people, this definition, that maybe you and I use to talk about binging than, I think when people think about binging, they think about like eating 3 pizzas and 2 liters of Coke and then a bucket of ice cream. And that probably is included in that definition. But I do think there's a broader conversation that needs to be happening about the word binge, just like the word diet, right? So can you just give us a little bit of background about what that even means to binge eat?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's like you said, knowing kind of like the levels or differentiating. I find a lot of people who overeat will say they binge ate. And so knowing the difference between overeating, mindless eating, and binge eating. So binge eating, it's when you eat a large amount of food in a small amount of time, ranging from like a half hour to 2 hours. And it's much more than a normal amount of food in a sitting. Like it's a lot, like you said, it could be like 3 slices of pizza and then like 2 cups of ice cream, all within like 45 minutes or something. And it also is followed by feelings of guilt and shame. And it feels a lot more, it feels like emotionally intense too, because of that guilt and shame. And so overeating would be something like you're full and then you had like another half a pizza and then you had like a cup of ice cream, and it wasn't necessarily intense or quick or, like it's also the emotional state you're in. And then mindless eating is mindless. So you're not really like, you're taking 3 bites here and another bite there, another, and it kind of scattered throughout the day. And so recognizing which one sounds like you would also help you kind of identify what is it that you're specifically struggling with and what else is going on. But I do find a lot like the overeating, binge eating kind of overlaps, but there is a difference. Binge eating is just a lot more food in a short period of time. And it's just more emotionally intense. Does that help to define it?
Yeah, it does. Because you're right. I think that both things happen, right? Like we throw around the word binging to talk about maybe a night out with your friends, right? Where you have one more taco than you had maybe intended. And we may call that, I binged on tacos, and that's not totally true. But I also do think that sometimes that like, that catch up eating that people do after, their Monday to Thursday restriction, for example, they may not be able to identify it correctly as binge eating on their Friday when they get home at 4:00, and they're like literally making up for the restriction that they've done during the week. I don't know if we're always correctly identifying that that's binge eating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both binge eating and overeating can happen when you're overly hungry. I do find that like the binge eating, usually when someone doesn't have a healthy relationship with food, it comes from either a long period of like restriction, or let's say they overate and then they feel guilty about overeating, and then they go into all or none mentality, and then they're like, oh, forget it. And then the overeating and the emotional response to overeating triggers a binge.
And so what is the research saying about where that's all coming from? Because this takes me back to like when I first said like how we kind of have that like not me mentality, right? Or it's like I should be able to muscle my way through this, and these rules don't apply to me. I can see why other people need to not diet, but I can diet. I'm not going to be susceptible to this. But what does the research actually say about binge eating and like the impact of dieting, diet culture, intentional weight loss has on binging?
Oh, of course. So binge eating, first of all, is a survival mechanism. That's the first thing to understand. It's an intrinsic human survival mechanism. So when you go, it's like, oh, not me, or like, I'll have more willpower, I'll have self-discipline. It's really the rules of willpower and self-discipline don't apply the same way to binge eating like it would to getting something done in your business or like studying for an exam, because the difference is willpower and self-control, for example, with studying for an exam or doing something with your business has to do with mental. Like it's all mental. You have to really get that mental willpower to do the action. With binge eating, when you're trying to deprive yourself of food, you're trying to defy your physiology and biology. And those mechanisms are mechanisms for survival, and they're stronger than that. That's why a lot of times in the beginning of the day, a lot of people who diet, like, I do so well in the beginning of the day. And what they're really saying is, I do so well with restricting and eating very little. But the willpower also starts to run out. Plus, you can't apply willpower in the best way when you're hungry. Like just your brain can't work at its best. And so that's why by the end of the day, a lot of people's binge eating episodes happen at the very end of the day, which just frustrates them more because they're like, oh, it was such a good day. And now it's such a bad day. And it's just like this downward spiral. So that's number one, recognizing that binge eating is a survival mechanism. And let me explain it in two ways. So there's the physical restriction and how it triggers binge eating. And then there's the psychological part of it. So binge eating in response to physical restriction would mean if you're just not eating enough, if you are doing like the low calorie diet, what happens is if your body's not getting enough energy, especially carbs, if your body's not getting enough carbs, your body sees that as a threat because it doesn't understand that you're surrounded by food. It just knows that it's not getting enough for its functions. And so it's gonna send out mechanisms to get you to eat. And so one of them is you have this neurotransmitter called neuropeptide Y in your brain, which is kind of like makes you crave carbs, but really food all around, because carbs is your body's essential fuel source. And, if you notice, the hungrier you get, the more refined carbs you want. And that's because your body's now like, we need to get these carbs in fast. So your body's really smart in like knowing which foods to make you crave when. But that's why when someone's like on a low calorie diet, they're thinking about food and they have such strong cravings because you literally just need to eat and your body is producing more of this neurotransmitter to push you to eat. And so you're trying to fight your physiology, which is really hard. In addition, counting calories all day or having these food rules or depriving yourself or not eating enough is stress on the body. And that's going to increase your cortisol and long-term, kind of chronic stress, even if it's low grade. We're not talking about like you missing the bus and running to catch it. Like it's just that day-to-day, like low level stress that's there. When you have that circulating in your system, that also increases cravings for like high sugar, high fat foods. So you have like all these mechanisms driving you to go eat. And then you have and if you haven't eaten in a long time, also, it's going to feel like, oh my God, I have to inhale everything because I'm like literally just hungry. So your body's trying to keep you alive is what it's doing. It's not wanting to go with your plans. The psychological factor, if someone's like, well, Rachel, I'm eating enough, trust me, and I still binge. So like, what's the situation here? And that's because like psychologically, if you're telling your brain that that food is off limits, it's still getting the message that there's a threat to access to food. It doesn't care that you're saying it's a threat to not access chocolate. It's very primal. It's wired to survive. So when you're saying I can't have access to this food, it registers it as, oh my God, we're not going to have access to food. Oh no, we need to eat now because, back in the caveman days, if they got like an animal and ate it and there's not going to be enough for later, like they might've been triggered to eat more, to store it as fat storages too, to help them survive. And so you're going to get those messages. What it's also going to do is increase reward response in your brain. So this is where kind of the people who say like, oh, I feel addicted to food, which kind of goes hand in hand with people who binge eat, like I just can't stop. It's because you also, by restricting mentally and psychologically, you've now increased the reward response in your brain to these foods. So you're going to crave them more and you're going to want them more. Again, it's a survival mechanism, but it's just not benefiting you in the world we live in today where food is accessible to many people. We didn't even start the conversation of people who don't have access to all these foods. And then diet culture also then hypes up like, buy these superfoods. And it's like, not everyone can afford that. That's another conversation. But the point is, there is research that shows they took two groups, women who were on a diet and not on a diet. And they were giving them milkshakes and they did MRI scans. And the women who were on a diet, just the anticipation of the milkshake, you saw there was higher reward response in their brain. So you're literally creating this feeling of like, oh my God, I feel so addicted to food. It's because you have all these food rules. Food rules are mental restriction. So you have to work through those, which food rules are really belief systems. Belief systems we have about foods, about calories, about sugar. And the thing that makes it tricky is that there's a kernel of truth in it all, except we just need to make sure we're getting the right context. Otherwise, it becomes this all or none thinking. And again, the psychological stress of constantly monitoring and being hypervigilant about your food increases the cortisol, increases your desire for these high fat, high sugar foods. And so all of it together, by restricting either by low calories or by having all these food rules that like, I'm not allowed to have this ever. This is so bad. I'm so bad if I have it. You're creating all these psychological and physiological mechanisms to fight you and to go binge as a survival mechanism. And in order for your body to feel safe and stop giving you these signals to go binge eat, you need to really start, first of all, eating when you're hungry. And if you can't identify your hunger cues, learning how to identify them so you're eating consistently and adequately throughout the day. That I find that number one already immediately reduces binge eating. Like when your body feels safe, it's getting enough to eat and consistently, that's key, consistently. Because if you're eating all your energy intake at night, that's still your body has been starved all day. So you got to eat it consistently throughout the day is the first thing. And then when you pair it with really genuinely listening to your body, wanting to eat in a way that feels good, removing food rules and authentically wanting to care for your body, you're not stressed about these things. You'll be able to eat a chocolate and move on. And again, for anyone who feels this is like so foreign, this is a journey, this is a process. We're talking about ultimately where you'll get to through this process. So does that explain kind of the science behind that?
Yeah, I love it. And I don't even know if we've got this deep into this conversation before on the podcast. And so I love that reference point around like increasing the reward mechanism in your brain, right? And I think even as a listener, because even as I'm sitting back and thinking about, okay, there were definitely times where I had some food rules and, maybe they temporarily were helpful and then transitioned into incredibly not helpful. And I remember specifically like eating the bread that came to the table when I went to my favorite restaurant. And it was like, well, we had to like get a second loaf, right? But it felt like this like huge celebration in my brain that we were having this bread and I was going to eat all the bread. So I think it's such a relatable point, right? The more that something feels off limits, it's almost like your brain is like this like teenager that's going to break the rules. And then if you're going to break them, you're going to like really blow it out of the water.
Oh yeah, I can rebel.
Yeah. And it's so relatable to think about it that way, because you're right. Like the higher on the shelf we put the thing like out of reach, the more exciting and the more adrenaline that we get when we reach it. Right.
Yeah. It's really human psychology. It's kind of like to your teenager point. If you get a new car that you tell the teenager, okay, you can only drive it once a week on a Tuesday at 12 o'clock from 1, you could use it to go do what you want. Like, first of all, that teenager is probably going to drive you nuts. Like, it's probably gonna be like, no, can I please drive it more? Can I please drive it more? Can I drive it now? Can I drive it now? And that is kind of your food rules where they drive you nuts. Like, I want it, but no, but wait till the weekend. And it's just like driving you nuts. You can't think about anything else. The other thing is your teenager likely is not going to come back at 1 o'clock. They'll probably want to take it like, I finally have it. I'm going to now have it. I don't care about the consequences later. I'm now going to drive it to like all the way till the night because I finally have it. If you have a real rebellious teenager,
and they're not going to drive the speed limit. No, we can take that analogy really far.
They're not going to think. Yeah, we're taking it real far.
They're making out in that car. Everything is happening in that car. Yeah,
but it's relatable to that's literally the human psychology. When the same thing with food, and that you go all out. And so what you want to do is habituate yourself. And what that means is like the more stimulus you have of something, the lower the response is. So for example, if you were to give that teenager and say like, okay, I trust you to make like, safe decisions, as long as you let me know when you're taking the car, you can take the car, and be independent in that way. Let's not get too specific. You do what works for you with your teenager, right? Like we're not going to take it so far, but the concept. And so probably at some point the teenager initially is going to be like, oh, I have the car, I'm going to call all the friends, it's going to drive everywhere all the time. That's probably going to last a week till it becomes like, oh, it's just a car. Like, okay, fine. And then they'll just use it when they need it. And so that's called habituation, because they've had the stimulus, they allow the stimulus to happen. And the more you have that stimulus, the lower the response happens. And so that's what we're working with with binge eating. It's really exposure, more exposure to that food and challenging your food rules. So if that for you is bread, it's saying, where can I incorporate bread? Instead of saying I can only have bread on the weekend, can I have like, okay, I'll have my usual breakfast and I'll add a slice of bread with it. And you know what, tomorrow for lunch, I'll have my usual, like salad and salmon or whatever food rule meal you have, which by the way, salad and salmon doesn't have to be a food rule meal. You can generally just want it and enjoy it too. But say, hey, can I throw some sweet potatoes in there? Or see like where you can incorporate it. I always, make sure that people know there are two ways to go about this. You can either go gung-ho and say, okay, I'm giving myself permission for everything. And for some people that works, and slowly but surely they learn to trust themselves. For some people, it's very scary and overwhelming. So you don't have to do all your foods at once. Choose one food that you can start to incorporate, learn how to habituate to it and to just make it like a normal food. So the reward response is not shooting off and it just kind of like rewarding, which by the way, you might be surprised once you really tune into the food for what it is. Sometimes you're like, yeah, it's delicious, but I don't eat it all the time. And sometimes you might even be like, I don't even really like these. But you need to actually experience the food for what it is. Right now, if you're binge eating and you feel like this addicted feeling to food, you're not truly experiencing food for what it is. You're experiencing it through restriction and the mechanisms that are at play.
This is such great information, Rachel. The one last thing I'd like to sort of like for you to touch on before we wrap up is, sometimes when we talk about like nutrition and we talk about health, like technically we just want people to be in this like nice, balanced, happy medium space where they can, self-regulate and make good choices. And often that conversation about food, dieting, nutrition, weight loss online, it's always extreme, right? It's like, if I say, drink some cranberry juice, someone in the comments will be like, well, what do you mean? Do you think blueberries suck? Right? Like we're always talking about like the opposite.
Someone is going to get offended.
Someone's offended, right? If you say like, and often I find that conversation about intuitive eating, and even I will admit when I first started learning about intuitive eating, I was like, yeah, like I'd intuitively put my head in the cookie jar and that's where I would live from now on. But that like balanced approach to nutrition is so unsexy and so like not, I don't know, like we just love to live in extremes. Yeah, it's not a quick fix. We love to live in those extremes. Like what kind of advice can you give our listeners around like the online conversation about nutrition? Maybe that's like a whole loaded conversation that needs its own hour, but
I feel like everything we talked about, each point can go on for like, we can do a 3-part series podcast on all of it. Like
it's true.
I could just talk about this forever. And there's just so much to learn, which is to your point, exactly what we said. There is so much to learn. So recognizing that even this podcast that you listen to and you're like, I don't know about that, or, oh, that sounds interesting. This is like probably going to be like about a 1-hour podcast. There's only so much you can share in a podcast. There's only so much you can share in an Instagram post. I'll sometimes have people commenting like, well, what about this in this situation? And I always tell them, you're an individual. There's so much nuance and context to your own journey. And so recognize that not everything is going to be for you or resonate with you. And if you want to learn more, it's saying, instead of writing this off, let me get curious and explore it more. And so, for example, one thing with nutrition online, if anything's ever extreme, that's a red flag. Like if anyone's ever, this is the cure all to something, or this is going to kill you. Yeah, probably best to not engage in that. The other thing about nutrition is I always say, take what sounds like reasonable for your life and let the rest go. And don't get into this comparison, because even with intuitive eating, there is gentle nutrition. There is place for that. And like you said, I think a lot of the conversation around intuitive eating online is more so helping you stop binging. And in order to do that, you need to give yourself permission to eat. And so there's a lot of conversation about allowing yourself to eat the cookie, because that's the first step to normalize cookies and then get to nutrition. And so there's less conversation about nutrition in the intuitive eating space, not because we don't care about nutrition, but because that's not the meeting point when you're first learning about it. You first have to learn to make peace with food. And then the nutrition piece comes from an authentic place of, I care about myself and I want my body to feel good. Because maybe you know this from experience, like maybe you put your head in the cookie jar and then you realize this is great that I could eat all the cookies, but like I genuinely don't want to because this doesn't feel good. And so that's, you know, I'll have that with my clients where they'll be like, okay, I ate all the things, but like, Rachel, I genuinely want to learn how to just incorporate vegetables because I want to care for my body. And that's when we get into the conversation of understanding, you know, protein and how to balance our meals. So there's definitely room for nutrition. So I think when it comes to the online space, it's one, seeing the red flags as like a no-no, you know, any kind of extreme cutting out cure-all talks, like, you know, gonna kill
Always,
you.
never. Like it's those kind of
Yeah,
statements, right? Like I say, like
right.
a really good practitioner is always going to lead with like, it depends, right? Like
Yes.
the moment that it's
Context.
like we lead with like, I always find this or never eat that, like
Yeah.
that's a huge red flag.
Yeah. The thing though that people are attracted to that though, I find with like diet culture is that doing this work that we're talking about and healing from diet culture, healing binge eating, learning to understand your body and your intuition, finding that balance with nutrition, it requires a lot of inner work. And a lot of times it's easier to say, I'm just going to follow this plan that this person tells me. It's much easier to follow all the time or never because it puts it in little boxes for me and I don't have to think. And you believe that you don't have to think about it. And then you just follow this, except that, are you really not thinking about it? If you're constantly stressing out about not eating something, that's thinking about it a lot. And so recognizing as humans, a lot of times we like to use that logical side of our brain of just tell me what to do because I don't want to have to think about this. But just be real with yourself. Like, is that really helping you not think about it? Or are you just now thinking about it all the time? And that initially doing this work of healing from diet culture and stopping to binge eat, even if you don't binge eat and you're like severely restricting, like on the other side of the spectrum, it's gonna be challenging. I even say it's harder than dieting in the beginning in terms of the effort and healing you have to put in, but it's a different intention. You're doing it for you. You're doing it for your own healing, and it does get easier. So I always say, you know, with dieting, it's easy initially, but hard in the long run. With intuitive eating and learning how to be the expert of your body and in a way that best benefits you and getting to this place of like balance with nutrition, it's going to feel hard initially, but simple and natural in the long run. And so like, which one are you aiming for if you're looking at your life? But back to the nutrition conversation, those are red flags to look out for. And then recognizing that diet culture doesn't own nutrition. Like zucchini was just sitting on the farm being zucchini before keto came along and decided to call it like
Noodles.
keto approved. Yeah, exactly. It's like diets don't own vegetables, diets don't own protein. Like that is something that you could also reclaim and say, hey, you can have zoodles if you want, but are you having it because you're like you're going to be bad if you have pasta? No, you're not going to be bad if you have pasta. But if for you today, you'll be like, well, if I know my body and I know if I have pasta right now, like that's just the food that doesn't like feel good to my body, then there's nothing wrong with saying like, oh, okay, I'm going to have some zucchini with like sweet potato or whatever it is. Or finding, I think with nutrition, it's finding that middle ground of like, well, what about pasta with zoodles? And like combining that. I think the biggest tip that I love to give and I find this super helpful. Instead of focusing when it comes to nutrition, instead of focusing all the things to cut out, start asking yourself, what can I add? So if you're having like whatever breakfast it is you're having, say, hey, okay, can I add a fruit in here? If you're having like a sandwich for lunch, say, oh, can I add a vegetable here? Whatever it is that you're eating, start to just ask, what can I add? Can I add protein? Can I add a whole grain? Okay, I like plain rice. Can I try it half of it with a whole grain and some stir fry vegetables? So you're not constantly stressing out about what you're eating, but you're thinking in an abundance mindset of like, what's going to make me feel good? So if you're just starting with nutrition, I recommend starting in that thinking of instead of me thinking I have to be good and cut out these things and only eat this, can I think in an abundance mindset? What can I add and how does that feel?
That's such great advice, Rachel. Where can our listeners find you? Because you offer such great programs. I mean, I love your online content, so they definitely need to go there. So maybe you can give us some insight where our listeners can find you and what kind of support you offer for people that are looking to take that first step.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Instagram at dietitian.rachelgoodman. That's the place I hang out the most. And I also have an online program, Living Free, which really walks you through how to stop binge eating. So a lot of things we talked about in real detail, like, okay, what's my starting place, step by step to help you stop binge eating. And all these resources, you can find it both on my Instagram and on my website, rachelgoodnutrition.com. So over there, I have that online course. I also have a guide, like a free guide called 3 Steps to Stop Feeling Out of Control with Food if you just need like a starting place, which talks about some of the things we talked here, but like in a way where you can like download and write out for yourself. And so that's my website as well. I think I shared with you the links on all of that.
We have all the links. Yeah. We'll put them right in the
Yeah.
show notes. So they're easy, clickable options. But thank you so much for sharing those. Cause I think you probably given some like major insight to people who are listening, right? That to be able to recognize some of those, like kind of, I'll call them destructive sort of thought patterns, right? Around food.
Self-sabotaging.
Exactly. And that now that that's like stirred up, I want them to feel like there are some options and resources that are really accessible. So we will put all those links in.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I just want to mention one thing. I also have a podcast too, which really deep dives into like different topics. So there's like the hunger, like how to identify hunger, or like movement, like just so much more, really like kind of all the topics we talked about here, but like expanded. So you can find my podcast as well, More Than What You Eat. And then on my website as well, you have like speaking engagements, like different topics I talk about. If you want me to come and talk specifically more about a topic that you heard here and like expand on it and help spread this message, as well as like coaching. So you can find all that there. And thanks so much for having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. I totally appreciate your insight and like your I just feel like it's just unapologetic representation of the literature and intuitive eating. I'm so grateful for your presence and for the information that you shared. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.